back to another video. In this one I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a series on the right rod for the right bait. And it's going to be bass fishing. Well, I know I've been doing a lot of steelhead stuff, so for bass fishing, the right rod for the right lure. And I'm going to start off with heavier tactics. And I'm going to cover basically the tactics that I fish. I'm not going to talk about big swim baits a whole lot because I don't use big swim baits. But things I'm going to use like crankbaits, spinnerbaits, chatterbaits, frogs, jigs, stuff like that, the basic stuff that will get you into bass fishing and get you out there catching fish. That's kind of what I'm going to go through. Not necessarily the big swim baits and like the stuff like that. So anyway, today we're going to talk about frog. So everything that you need for frogs. We're going to talk rod, reel, line, even going to maybe pull out a couple frogs and see. So for me, personally, we're starting off with the rods. I have two different frog rods that I will be using. And they're a little bit different, that's why I have two of them. And usually I'm only going to bring one with me, because, bringing the more rods you bring, of course, the more versatile you are because you have different rods, but it's hard to carry them. Like bank fishing, it's hard to bring a bunch of rods. Or when we're in the boat, unless you have a bass boat with all the, the rod lockers, it's harder to, to keep a bunch of rods in there. So we try to limit how many rods we bring. So I'm only going to bring one out of two of these rods depending on conditions. So the first one is a broomstick. And it's actually a shorter rod, which a lot of people broomstick when they say that it's 7'6" to 8 foot, and but this is actually a 7'3" extra heavy. It's actually a I'm not going to get too much on brand because I don't want you guys to want to go out and buy the same exact brand. But what this is it's by Favorite. That's the company. This is actually the Long Cruise TV Special Edition rod. If you don't know who that is, I encourage you to go check that out. But if you are a bass fisherman and you watch YouTube, you probably already know who that is, Long Cruise TV. So this is his special edition rod, and I got this when he first made them. They've been out for a while now, and now they're doing different stuff. But when he first made them, this is one of the first models, 7'3", extra heavy. I think for a while they actually stopped making these. I don't know if they still do or not right now. But this rod, he designed it for heavy techniques when he first designed his rods. And this one is you guys can't see it all that much, but it is a stiff rod. And this is a rod that I'm going to use for frogs, but not necessarily all my frogs. So I'll get into to the frogs in a little bit, but this is going to be a rod that, it's a broomstick that you need heavy stuff. So middle of summer, like July, August, when it's really hot, the vegetation is super thick. Maybe you're looking for some big fish. This is the route I'm going to go to. If the vegetation's super thick, whether it being mats or lily pads or, hydro, milfoil, whatever you're going to fish with, this is the rod that I'm going to be fishing if it's super thick stuff. And of course it's a lot stiffer, like I said, so it's not the best for walking the frogs. You can do it. I've done it and caught fish. I've actually fished this in more open water and caught fish walking frogs. A couple years ago, it was actually my PB a couple years ago, a 4.5 pounder, or I think it was 3.5 or 4 pounds, walking it in open water, and he just demolished it. And it worked fine, but for me, my preference would be to use this rod in thick, heavy cover where I'm not really focused on working the frog, walking it really, smooth to get it, you know what I mean? Walking it, you want, I'll get to that later, but you want to be able to it's easier if you have a nice, softer tip to get it to walk easier with the frog. With this here, it's going to do more of a bobbing action when you try to walk it, because you're going to try, when you walk it, when you try with a stiffer rod like this, it's going to be it's going to bob the frog a lot more. And what I mean by that is, instead of the frog when it walks, you want it to go side to side, that's walking. When it's bobbing, it's kind of just pulling forward and kind of hopping, kind of just bobbing its way through. And that's better, that works for me better in a heavier cover, like I said. So with this rod, that's fine. Do that in a heavy cover, create a lot more commotion, and get the fish to come up through the cover. And then with that rod, you have enough power to where when that fish does blow up on it and you stick those hooks in him, you can drag him out of that cover. So that's the first rod. That is the first rod that we're going to go over. The next one, which actually has a big jig on it right now, but this is also my frogging rod. And this is actually a 7'6", so it's 3 inches longer. And with that 3 inches, what that does is it gives it a softer tip. Now, not all rods are like it. They do make really stiff 7'6", but for me, what this rod did, when they added that 6 inches to it, they added a softer tip. That's 6 inches, or 3 inches on that one, but it gives it a nice soft, you guys can't see, but I'm pulling, it gives it a nice soft tip. And that is really going to help out when you're walking a frog, getting it to go back and forth. This rod still has a lot of power. You still want something with a lot of power, but just with a little softer tip. And if I can only pick one frog rod, it would be this one. A 7.3 or a 7.6, but a little bit softer tip. Not necessarily the stiff, like flip and stick. Something with a little softer tip. And so great rod for that is actually for the shorter ones, for a 7.3, the Dobyns Fury makes a 735, which is 7'3", 5 power. And it's an excellent rod. It's got a nice soft tip. It's 7.3, but it still has a soft tip to it. And it's really nice for walking the frogs. And same with this is the Powell 765. This is actually their utility rod, which I use for a bunch of different stuff. But it's a great rod to throw frogs around. And with that softer tip, it's more of, I want to say, open water rod, but you don't have to be in open water. This rod has plenty of power. You still want something with that heavy, like I said, heavy rod. This is actually, let's see, this is a mag heavy fast action rod. So it's still a heavy rod, but it just has a softer, that tip section is a lot softer. But when you get into the backbone, you still have the power to drive frog hooks into the fish and rip them out of cover. So this isn't the ideal rod for fishing like super heavy stuff, but it will do it. It's more better for maybe sparse vegetation, more early summer, in the spring when they first start hitting frogs, which, for me, that's water temperatures around 60 to 65 is when they're going to be, hitting the frogs pretty good. And so, and the cover's not going to be grown up yet. It's still going to be kind of, sparse. The lily pads aren't going to be as thick. The mats are going to be a lot thinner coming off of the, winter. They haven't got a whole lot of time to grow. This rod, rod like this would work great. And like I said, this rod could still pull them out of the big stuff. If I bring one rod with me, 90% of the time, it's this rod. It will still pull them out of the big stuff. And that's kind of it for rod. Something heavy, but you could go with the two different things. You can go with the ones with the really stiff tip if you're fishing really heavy cover, or something with a little softer tip. And really, just go to your store. A lot of people these days order stuff off Tackle Warehouse, order rods, but if you have a store near you, I would recommend going. You don't necessarily have to buy it from that store. The prices may be better on Tackle Warehouse or something, but anyway, I recommend going down there and bringing someone with you and have one of you hold that pole and one of you, bend on that tip and really feel a couple different brands of rods, a couple different actions of rods until you get what you want. Something with really heavy backbone but a soft tip. That's what I would recommend for a beginner. And anywhere between a 7-foot to a 7'6" rod. You don't want to go too long. Like me, I'm pretty big. I'm almost 6 foot. So the 7'6", it's not too bad. But if you were like, maybe a shorter, like a little kid or just shorter, might be better to go with like a 7 foot or 7'3". But those are the two frog rods that I bring with me, and the types that I would recommend if you were to get two. Get both. If you're going to get one, I would just recommend that one with a little softer tip on it because it's easier to work your frogs. You know, especially for a beginner who's learning how to walk a frog, it's easier to get that frog walking. So those are the two rods, and for the line, for this little bit lighter rod with a little softer tip, I have 50-pound braid. And most of the time, that's all you need. Most of the time, 50-pound braid, you know, is what I run, and it will get the job done. But again, if you're fishing that super heavy, thick cover, with this other rod, I jump up to 65. And doesn't matter the brand. You can test out a few different brands. I use Power Pro. You can use this Cast King braid. All kinds of P-Line makes braid. A bunch of different brands that makes braid. But just your favorite brand that you've tried in the past, or just pick up a brand and try it out. But 50 pound on my lighter one, 65 on the heavier one. And like I said, 50 is going to get the job done 90% of the time. Just like this rod, a little bit softer, it's going to get the job done 90% of the time. You know, the only place you really need that is if you were down in like Florida, flipping mats or, you know, fishing thick stuff in Florida. But otherwise, this rod's going to do fine. 50-pound braid is going to be fine. And then for the reel, just something fast and powerful. This one here, the Shimano Curado. If you don't want to spend that much money, there's other options out there from Shimano and other reel brands. But something that's got some power to it that you can crank on fish, and something that that's got a nice good drag, at least 12 pounds or heavier. I think this has like 11 or 12 pounds. Just that way that drag does not slip. And then also something that is going to be fast. 7:1 to 1, this is 7:2 to 1. I'd do 7:1 to 1 gear ratio or faster. And so if you don't know what that is, you just look and it says, usually right on the side, it says right here, gear ratio 7:2 to 1. And what that means is that basically it's just a fast reel. It picks up a lot of line quick. And the higher those numbers are, the faster it's going to pick up that line. So, I mean, that's it, really, for the setup that I use for frogs. And so, right, guys, hopefully you learned something there. The next video will be out shortly after this one, hopefully, and it's going to be on jig fishing. So I'm going to kind of go down, starting from the heavy fishing that I do, frog fishing, down to you know, crankbait finesse fishing, which I don't do very often, but I'll talk about a little bit. So the next one's going to be jig fishing, so that should be coming out here pretty quick.